Welcome to History Unwound. You are with Kate.
And George. Today we're going back to Rome, to a morning in March, the year 44 before Christ, and to the most famous murder in history.
It is early morning in Rome, March 15th in the year 44 before Christ. The city is waking up the way it always does. Vendors setting up stalls in the forum, smoke rising from bakeries, dogs barking in the alleyways.
And inside a villa on the Via Sacra, one of the most powerful men in recorded history is getting dressed. Julius Caesar, dictator of Rome, conqueror of Gaul, the man who crossed the Rubicon and won a civil war.
But on this particular morning, he is hesitating.
His wife, Calpurnia, had been up all night. She had a dream, and in the dream she saw her husband murdered.
Welcome to History Unwound. I am Kate.
And I am George. This is episode 2, The Ides of March.
If you are new here, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We drop new stories every week. And George, this one has been requested since Pompey.
It has, because this is, by many accounts, the single most consequential political assassination in Western history. And what makes it so fascinating is that almost everyone involved thought they were doing the right thing.
So let's start before that morning. Let's start with how Caesar became the kind of man that 60 senators decided had to die.
Julius Caesar was born in the year 100 before Christ. He came from an old patrician family, but not a particularly wealthy or powerful one.
His family claimed descent from Venus herself through the hero Aeneas. That kind of claim was unusual even by Roman standards.
What set him apart was ambition. Relentless, strategic, almost superhuman ambition. By his 20s, he had already been captured by pirates, and after his ransom was paid, hunted them down and had them crucified.
That story alone tells you everything about the man. He was charming, he was dangerous, and he did not forget.
He climbed the traditional political ladder in Rome. The cursus honor him, but he was impatient with it. By his late 30s, he had formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Cassius, the three most powerful men in Rome, dividing influence among themselves.
And then came Gaul.
Caesar spent nearly a decade conquering what is now France, Belgium, parts of Germany and Britain. The Gallic Wars were brutal. Ancient sources estimate he killed over 1 million people and enslaved another million.
But in Rome, the dispatches he sent home made him a hero. He was a brilliant writer. His war commentaries read like thriller novels. They were propaganda, of course, but they were effective propaganda.
He became fabulously wealthy from the plunder. He became beloved by his legions, who would follow him anywhere. And he became exactly the kind of man the Roman Senate feared.
Because the Republic had a deep, almost religious terror of kings.
That fear went back to the founding of the Republic itself. In 509 BC, the Romans had overthrown their last king, Tarquinius Superbus, and for nearly 5 centuries after that, the word rex, king, was the worst thing you could call a Roman politician.
The entire system of government, the 2 consuls, the Senate, the term limits, the checks and balances, all of it existed to prevent any one man from accumulating too much power.
And here was Caesar, who had accumulated all of it. The legions loved him. The common people loved him. And the Senate was terrified.
When his command in Gaul officially ended in 49 BC, the Senate ordered him to disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen.
He refused, and on January 10th, 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River with his 13th legion. That river was the legal boundary. Once he crossed it under arms, he was an enemy of the state.
He reportedly said, "Alia iacta est." The die is cast.
What followed was a civil war. Caesar against Pompey and the Senate optimates. It lasted 4 years. It ranged across the Mediterranean, and Caesar won.
Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered on the beach by Egyptian courtiers trying to curry favor with Caesar. When Caesar arrived and was presented with Pompey's severed head, he reportedly wept.
That is a detail that tells you something about the complexity of the man. Pompey was his enemy, his rival, and also his former son-in-law. Caesar's daughter Julia had married Pompey. When she died, the last personal bond between the 2 men died with her.
After Egypt, where he famously became involved with Cleopatra, Caesar returned to Rome as dictator. And here is where the real tension begins.
But before we get to the tension, it is worth saying Caesar did real things with his power. He reformed the calendar, the Julian calendar we use today with 365 days and a leap year. That was him. The old Roman calendar had drifted so far off the solar year that harvest festivals were falling in winter.
He expanded citizenship to people in Gaul and Spain. He settled veterans on public land. He rebuilt cities that had been destroyed in the civil wars.
He also packed the Senate with his own supporters, raised it from 600 to 900 members, and gave seats to men from the provinces who owed everything to him.
So he was genuinely reforming Rome, but he was also concentrating all power in himself while doing it.
Because the Roman Republic had a legal office called dictator. It was meant to be temporary, 6 months during an emergency. Sulla had held it years earlier, used it to purge his enemies, and then voluntarily resigned it.
Caesar did not resign it.
In February of 44 BC, just a month before the Ides, he was named Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity, for life.
And that word, perpetuo, was the match that lit everything.
It was one thing to be dictator during a crisis, but to declare that you would hold absolute power forever, that was a king in everything but name.
There were other provocations. He put his own face on Roman coins, something no living Roman had ever done. He wore a purple toga in public. He sat in a gilded chair in the Senate, while everyone else stood.
At the festival of Lupercalia, just a month before the assassination, Mark Antony publicly offered Caesar a crown, a diadem. Caesar refused it, but the crowd noticed that he seemed reluctant to push it away.
Some historians think the whole thing was staged, that Caesar was testing whether Rome would accept a king.
Whether it was staged or not, it confirms the senator's worst fears. This man intended to be Rex, and if they did not act, the Republic was finished.
So the conspiracy began, and the man at its center was Gaius Cassius Longinus.
Cassius was a seasoned military commander who had fought with distinction under Crassus. He was clever, bitter, and resentful. He felt Caesar had passed him over for promotions and honors.
But Cassius knew that he alone did not have the moral authority to lead an assassination. He needed a name that meant something to Rome.
He needed Marcus Junius Brutus.
Why Brutus, specifically?
Because the Brutus name carried enormous symbolic weight. The original Brutus, Lucius Junius Brutus, had been the man who expelled the last king of Rome 5 centuries earlier. Marcus Brutus was his direct descendant. In Roman political culture, that lineage was practically a job description.
Brutus is one of the most complicated figures in this entire story. He was a philosopher, an intellectual, a stoic. He genuinely believed in republican ideals and the old Roman virtues of shared governance.
He was also Caesar's friend. Possibly more than a friend, there was a persistent rumor in Rome that Caesar had been Brutus's biological father. Caesar had a long affair with Brutus's mother, Servilia, around the time Brutus was conceived.
Whether that rumor was true or not, Caesar treated Brutus with extraordinary favor. He pardoned him after Brutus fought on Pompey's side in the Civil War. He gave him a provincial governorship. He publicly called him his favorite.
And that is what made Brutus's participation so devastating. This was not just a political assassination. It was the deepest kind of personal betrayal.
Cassius worked on Brutus for months. He left anonymous notes on Brutus's chair in the Senate, notes that said things like, "You sleep, Brutus, and you are no true Brutus," reminding him that his ancestor Lucius Brutus had been the man who overthrew the last king of Rome in 509 BC.
Brutus agonized over it. His wife Porcia noticed something was wrong. She reportedly stabbed herself in the thigh with a blade to prove she was strong enough to share his secret.
When she asked what was troubling him, and he finally told her, she said she had already guessed.
The conspiracy grew to include roughly 60 senators. It is remarkable that a secret shared among 60 men held for weeks.
They called themselves the Liberators. The Liberators, they believed they were saving Rome from tyranny.
The date was chosen carefully. March 15th was the last Senate session before Caesar was scheduled to leave Rome for a massive military campaign against the Parthian Empire.
If he left with his legions, he would be untouchable for years. It had to be now.
Which brings us back to that morning, Calpurnia's dream.
The ancient sources describe the dream in different ways. Suetonius says she dreamed of holding Caesar's murdered body. Plutarch says she dreamed that the pediment of their house collapsed.
Whatever the specifics, she woke in terror and begged Caesar not to go to the Senate. She told him to send Mark Antony in his place to postpone the session to claim illness.
And Caesar listened. He was genuinely rattled. There had been other omens too. A soothsayer had warned him weeks earlier to beware the Ides of March. A sacrifice that morning produced an animal with no heart, which the priests called the worst possible sign.
Caesar decided to stay home. He sent word that the session should be postponed.
And then Decimus Brutus arrived.
Not Marcus Brutus, the philosopher. Decimus Brutus, a different man entirely. Decimus was one of Caesar's closest friends and one of his best generals. He had fought alongside Caesar in Gaul.
He was also one of the 60 conspirators.
Decimus sat with Caesar and gently mocked him. He said, "Will you really let an old woman's dream make you look weak? The Senate is assembled. They are waiting to vote you new honors. If you send word that you are staying home because your wife had a nightmare, your enemies will use it against you."
It worked. Caesar got up, took his toga, and walked to the Senate. He left his bodyguard behind. He had recently dismissed his Spanish personal guard, believing he no longer needed protection in Rome.
The Senate was meeting that day not in the usual curia but in a hall attached to the theater of Pompey. There is something almost poetic about that. He would die in a building that bore his dead rival's name.
As he approached, the soothsayer was in the crowd. Caesar saw him and reportedly said, "The Ides of March have come," as if to say, "You were wrong."
The soothsayer answered, "Aye, they have come, but they are not yet gone."
Inside the Senate chamber, the conspirators had arranged themselves in specific positions. They had rehearsed. Some would crowd around Caesar to prevent anyone from helping him. Others would do the actual killing.
There was one major problem: Mark Antony.
Antony was Caesar's most powerful ally, a strong, athletic former soldier who was also consul that year. If he was in the room, he would fight.
So another conspirator, Trebonius, intercepted Antony at the entrance and engaged him in a long conversation, holding him outside while the others moved into position.
Caesar took his seat. A senator named Tullius Cimber approached, apparently to petition for his exiled brother's recall. He grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down from his shoulder.
That was the signal.
Publius Servilius Casca struck first. He was standing behind Caesar. He slashed downward at Caesar's neck, but his hands were shaking. The blade only grazed the shoulder.
Caesar reacted immediately. He grabbed Cassius' arm, twisted, and stabbed at him with his writing stylus. The only thing he had. He shouted in Latin, "Cassius, you villain, what are you doing?"
Casca panicked and shouted to the others in Greek, "Brothers, help me."
And then they all closed in.
23 stab wounds. Suetonius tells us that a physician who later examined the body concluded that only one wound was actually fatal, a blow between the ribs that pierced the aorta.
But the rest were not clean or precise. The conspirators were crowding each other. They were cutting and slashing wildly. Several of them accidentally wounded each other in the frenzy. Brutus was cut on the hand.
Caesar fought. He struggled. He tried to get to his feet. For a moment, he was pushing through them.
And then he saw Brutus.
Whether he actually said "kaisou teknon," the Greek phrase that Shakespeare would later render as "etu brute," we do not know. Suetonius says he said it. Plutarch says he said nothing when he saw Brutus, just pulled his toga over his face.
Either version is devastating. The words or the silence.
He fell at the base of a large marble statue of Pompey. His blood pooled on the Senate floor. The greatest military mind of his age died unarmed, in a building named after the man he had beaten.
The immediate aftermath was chaos.
The conspirators had planned the murder in extraordinary detail, but they had not planned what came after.
That is the most remarkable thing. They had 60 men who agreed on how to kill Caesar. Not one of them had a coherent plan for what to do the next morning.
Brutus apparently expected to walk out onto the steps of the Senate, explain that they had saved the Republic, and be welcomed as heroes.
Instead, the Senate chamber emptied in screaming panic. Senators fled in every direction. The conspirators stood there, holding their bloody daggers, essentially alone.
They walked through the streets carrying their weapons, shouting, "Liberty! Tyranny is dead!" The citizens of Rome stared at them and then locked their doors.
Nobody cheered.
For 2 days, there was a fragile truce. Brutus and Cassius held the capital. Mark Antony and Caesar's allies regrouped. There were tense negotiations. A Senate meeting that tried to balance amnesty for the assassins with honoring Caesar's legacy.
Then came the funeral. And Mark Antony destroyed everything.
Antony had obtained Caesar's will, and in it, Caesar had left a substantial cash gift to every Roman citizen. He had also left his private gardens across the Tiber as a public park.
At the funeral, Antony read the will aloud. Then he held up Caesar's toga torn and stained with blood, with the 23 stab holes visible for all to see.
The crowd went mad. They tore wooden benches from the forum to build an impromptu funeral pyre. Then they ran through the streets with torches, looking for the conspirators' houses.
Brutus and Cassius fled Rome within days. They would never return.
What followed was years of civil war. Antony allied with Caesar's adopted heir, a 19-year-old named Gaius Octavius, and a politician named Lepidus. They formed the Second Triumvirate.
They first act together as a purge. The proscriptions, they drew up lists of enemies to be executed and their property confiscated. Somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 Roman citizens were killed, including Cicero, the greatest orator in Roman history.
Cicero had not been part of the assassination, but he had celebrated it publicly. He wrote to Cassius calling it the greatest day in Roman history. Antony never forgave him.
Cicero's end was brutal. He tried to flee by sea but turned back. When the soldiers found him on a country road, he bared his neck and told them to strike. His head and his hands, the hands that had written the Philippics against Antony, were nailed to the speaker's platform in the forum.
That is the kind of vengeance the assassination unleashed.
Brutus and Cassius gathered their armies in the east. In 42 BC, at the Battle of Philippi in northern Greece, Antony and Octavian crushed them.
Cassius died first, by his own hand, after a battlefield misunderstanding led him to believe the battle was lost. Brutus held on for 3 more weeks before falling on his sword.
According to Plutarch, Brutus's last words were a line from a Greek tragedy, roughly translated, "O wretched virtue, you were nothing but a word, and yet I worshipped you as real."
Those words haunt me.
After Philippi, Antony took the eastern provinces and Octavian took the west. The alliance between them was always fragile. Antony became entangled with Cleopatra in Egypt. Octavian built his power base in Italy.
The final civil war came in 31 BC, the Battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet defeated Antony and Cleopatra. They both died in Egypt the following year. She by a serpent's bite, he by his own sword.
And Octavian stood alone. He took the name Augustus. He became the first emperor of Rome. The Republic was over.
And here is the thing. Augustus did not call himself emperor. He did not call himself king. He was very careful about that. He called himself princeps, first citizen. He kept all the forms of the Republic. The Senate still met, elections still happened, but real power flowed through him.
He learned from Caesar's mistake. Caesar had been open about his absolute power. Augustus hid his behind a veil of Republican tradition, and it worked. He ruled for over 40 years.
What strikes me about this whole story is the irony.
The conspirators killed Caesar to save the Republic, and in doing so, they guaranteed its destruction.
If Caesar had lived another decade, who knows? Maybe the Republic would have evolved. Maybe he would have established a more gradual transition. Instead, his death created a power vacuum that produced 13 years of civil war and the very thing the assassins feared most.
A permanent one-man ruler, an emperor, the thing they killed to prevent.
And the name itself, Caesar, it became the word for ruler across civilization. The German Kaiser, the Russian Tsar, the Arabic Caesar. 2,000 years later, the name still means king.
Every March 15th, somewhere in the world, someone writes, "We wear the Ides of March" on social media. We have turned a real man's murder into a proverb.
But underneath the proverb, there is a genuine tragedy. A man who trusted the wrong people, a friend who chose his principles over his affection, and a republic that died trying to save itself.
One of the details I keep coming back to is Calpurnia's dream. She saw it coming. She told him. He almost listened.
Almost.
History turns on. Almost.
So the question this story leaves us with, the one that scholars and students have debated for 2,000 years, were the conspirators right?
Was killing Caesar justified? He had seized power. He had ended democratic governance. He had made himself dictator for life. By the standards of the Republic, he was a tyrant.
But the cure was worse than the disease. The republic they killed to save was already dying. It had been dying for decades, through Marius and Sulla, through the Catiline conspiracy, through the civil wars. Caesar did not kill the republic.
And Brutus, the noblest of the conspirators, the man who acted from genuine conviction. His reward was exile, defeat, and suicide, and 2,300 years of debate over whether he was a hero or a traitor.
Dante put him in the lowest circle of hell in Satan's mouth, alongside Judas Iscariot, the ultimate traitor.
Shakespeare made him the tragic hero. This was the noblest Roman of them all.
Both can't be right, and yet somehow both feel true.
That is what makes this story immortal. It is not just a political assassination. It is a story about loyalty, about idealism, about the gap between what we intend and what we cause.
And it all started because a wife had a dream, and a husband did not listen.
Next time on History Unwound, we leave Rome behind and travel 1,000 years forward to a city that called itself the New Rome, Constantinople, the last capital of the Roman Empire, a city protected by the greatest walls in the ancient world. Walls that held for 1,000 years until a 21-year-old sultan named Mehmed decided they would fall.
The fall of Constantinople, May 29th, 1453, the day Rome finally died.
Thank you for listening. I am George.
And I am Kate. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll see you next time. That's all for this episode of History Unwound. If this story gripped you, subscribe and leave a review. It means more than you know.
Next time, we travel 1,000 years forward to Constantinople, the last capital of the Roman Empire, the greatest walls in the ancient world, and the 21-year-old sultan who brought them down.
The day Rome finally died. Don't miss it.
I am George. Thank you for listening.
And I am Kate. We'll see you next time.